Hey everybody, welcome back to Tech Odyssey. So what I want to talk about tonight has to do with the Xperia 1 Mark IV and not making excuses. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't like the phone, because I love this phone, even though nobody's going to listen to that by the time we get done with this video. But I love this phone. If I didn't, I wouldn't still have it. I wouldn't be talking about it. I'll address that more later in this video. So the thing, when I say stop making excuses, we need to stop giving manufacturers passes on things. There is very clearly a heat issue related to this phone, and I can tell you exactly what it is. When you look at this phone and you see how thin it is, and if you look at any of the teardown information, you look at any of the stuff that's out there talking about the heat and the thermal and all the stuff that has to do with the Snapdragon 8 Generation 1, most people saw the writing on the wall, because all the other Xperia 1 phones have had heat issues as well. So this is not a new issue. Whenever it comes to this phone, Sony just keeps doubling down, and they keep doing the same thing and expecting a different result, which is the definition of stupidity. When it comes to this phone, the heat issues are there. They're prevalent. You can find them. All you have to do really is go outside and turn on your camera. Now, if you're in 70-degree weather, it probably works okay. Probably within the tolerances of what you would expect out of a phone. A lot of people like to use the excuse, well, every other phone with the Snapdragon 8 Generation 1 does the same thing. It does not. I have tested multiple phones that have the Snapdragon 8 Generation 1, and they don't do this. Now, whenever you talk about that, though, some of them do overheat. For instance, I tested out the OnePlus 10 Pro. It took about 6.5 minutes to overheat. Is that okay? Well, it's better than 2 minutes. I'll say that much. It's about 2.5 times longer, because I got about 6.5 minutes as opposed to the 2 minutes and 40 seconds I get with this on average. Well, I tested out the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra. I stopped recording at 10 minutes because I didn't want to stand out in the sun any longer. And I stood out, it was like 97 degrees outside, super humid, heat directly out, sunlight, not standing in the shade. There are ways you can mitigate this, but it requires vapor chambers. It requires copper heating, different heat mitigation stuff, thermal piping, all that stuff to make it work. Sony didn't do that. And because Sony didn't do that, it's very prone to overheating. The thing is, when you have phones like this, when you have smartphones, they have what's called a system on a chip, which is the processor. In a phone, that processor usually has the computer processor in it, the graphics processor, and sometimes the modem. Usually it has the modem as well. One tiny little chip, and it uses a lot less power than a traditional CPU inside of a computer. I was on a podcast with Easy Computer Solutions, the tech preacher, the other night, and we were talking about that. And when you get a computer processor, it uses easily over 100 watts of power. It uses a lot. They get hot. They can heat up an entire room by several degrees. I've got a dual radiator fan water cooler on there. And then you look at this, and these chips can get up to 3 gigahertz on the primary core. When these things are kicking, they put out a lot of heat and a lot of energy in that tiny little space right up over here. You can tell that's where the phone gets hot. And that's what happens. And when that happens, it starts to shut things down. You get the warning that pops up that says some features will be turned off. You start getting the page flipping and the stuttering, and you start getting the lag in the operating system. You get the 120 hertz throttles down to 60 hertz. It starts to impact the phone because the phone effectively is going into phone shock. It's kind of like the human body. Whenever you start having a shock issue, it starts shutting down the things that are not important so that it can preserve the core of the phone, just like your body does. That's what happens here, and that's the problem. And it can compensate for a little bit, just like the human body. You don't get heat stroke immediately when you go outside, but two things happen. If you stand out there in the sun exposure for too long, you can get heat stroke, and then it takes a lot for your body to cool down. You can't just cool back off once you get to a certain point. Exactly what happens to this phone. It can compensate for a little while, but based off the temperature, based off of what you're doing, once it gets to a certain point, it's full tilt, and then bam, it's overheated, and then it takes a while to cool down. It won't just cool down on its own very quickly because there's nothing moving air. I call this a hot box because everything's packed up inside this super tight IP68 package, Snapdragon 8 Generation 1, running super hard, trying to do stuff on the camera, or playing games or streaming. There's a lot of stuff that can kick this phone into high gear. And in some instances, it's okay. I live streamed for an hour. A whole hour with this phone, with the selfie camera. I did it to see if it could actually handle it. I was impressed. It got very, very hot, but it was 67 degrees with like 50% humidity in my office out here. If it were 80 or 90 degrees, it might not have made it. but then again, you're probably not live streaming for an hour outside. But all those things to say, Sony knew what they were getting themselves into. Sony knew that there was problems with the Snapdragon 8 Generation 1. Before this chip ever got put into phones, or when we were talking about testing and things like that, before even the S22 series launched, they were already earmarked for having a lot of problems with heat. So we knew going into that, if phone companies didn't do something to counteract that heat, then they were going to be doomed. Well, Sony seems to be the only one that didn't really take it seriously, and Sony is the one, again, that has heat problems, and they refuse to change this design. And honestly, I love the design. I don't really want them to change the design, but they need to do something to make it to where these phones can stand the heat. Now, I even saw a comment saying, well, it's not going to be summer much longer. Once it gets to the fall and winter, it will be okay. That's not really an argument you make for a $1,200 to $1,600 phone. This phone's not even available in the US yet, and when it gets here, $1,599 plus tax. Is this really something that's acceptable? I don't think that it is. If it's acceptable for you, I guess, that's okay, but we can't be making excuses for it. If it's a level of acceptability for you, then that's fine, but that's not something we should accept as a status quo. Now, what I've done with mine is I seem to be having some pretty extreme heat problems. And I've checked the Reddit forums, I've checked online. Some people say they aren't having any issues. And some people are having very extreme issues where you pull up the camera, just like I'm having problems. You pull up the camera, just trying to snap a couple of shots outside, and within maybe a minute or two, you get the overheating warning. So what I've done is I initiated a return on this one. I have another one coming out. I'm going to continue to test it, see if this one does the same thing. I know it's going to have heat issues. Like, it's going to, but maybe it's not as bad. Maybe there's a problem with the thermal paste. Maybe they did a terrible job in quality assurance with thermal paste, and maybe some of them are just capable of handling more heat than others. But the moral of the story here is we can't make excuses for these companies, and Sony's not really even making a statement about it. And of course, I don't necessarily blame them, because when you're a big company, you don't want to say your phone, your flagship new phone, has heating issues, because then that's going to send a bad signal, and then everyone's going to go, oh, well, it's got heating issues. It's kind of questionable right now, because what happens is it's out in the field. It's out with us, people who have bought it, and largely people who buy these phones and like them are inclined to keep them. You compensate for it. You go, okay, well, maybe I'll just take a couple of pictures. Maybe I'll take a short video clip and shut it off. I don't need to use it that long. I'm not going to use it for 5 minutes straight, so it's not going to be that big of a deal, right? Well, you might not be, until you're like someone like me and go out to your son's football game next month, and you want to take pictures and video on the sideline, and it won't be able to do that. I guarantee you it won't be able to do that. So it's okay. Like, I get it. There are problems here, and we want it to not be a problem. And for some people, it might not be an issue. I made a comparison the other day saying, well, if you're in Oslo, it might be all right. But then I had somebody chime in Oslo said that theirs is unusable. Theirs is having the same problem. So it seems like maybe there might be some different issues going on here. Maybe different batches, maybe quality assurance issues that make it worse for some people than others. I don't know, but I've called out many manufacturers. I made probably 3 or 4 videos last year with the S21 Ultra because the battery life was terrible. It started off amazing for like the first 2 weeks, and then they came out with an update and it went straight off a cliff, and it never recovered until the fall once One UI 4 came out. So I don't have a problem calling out phones. I don't have a problem calling out manufacturers. I did the same thing with the Pixel. I made a lot of videos on how to fix things, how to get workarounds, or what's Google doing to fix it, and even called them out a lot of times, to the point where I was a little worried about getting kicked off of Team Pixel, because I didn't have a lot of nice things to say at one point. So I'm not saying you have to get rid of the phone. I'm not saying you have to not enjoy the phone. I'm not saying you have to hate Sony or you have to hate the phone. None of that stuff. I love this phone. This is one of my most favorite phones in a long time. I didn't finally get a Sony phone until I got the Xperia 1 Mark III, and I fell in love with it. I did. Totally love that phone. I ended up getting this one because I wanted the upgraded camera, the better selfie camera, which is tremendously better than the last one. I wanted the 120 frames per second at 4K. That's a really cool thing. I shot some of that video today. So there are a lot of great reasons that are compelling for this phone. I think it's a beautiful piece of hardware. I love the 4K resolution on here. I love the vibration with the sound. I like that it has a 5,000 milliamp battery. It gets better battery life. This is a huge upgrade in a lot of ways over the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. But that doesn't mean we can sweep stuff under the rug. That doesn't mean that we can't live with it. I'm not saying if you're happy with it, then keep it. If you're not having a lot of issues, that's okay. If you are having a lot of issues and it's detrimental and you can't stand it, maybe get rid of it and wait for them to do a software fix. I've had a lot of people say, hey, they're going to fix it with the software, just like they fixed all the last ones. And that to me is like, okay, well, if they have to keep fixing all of them with software patches 6 months down the road, maybe don't buy one on launch. And I was very lucky. The Xperia 1 Mark III apparently, by the time I got it, had already had a couple of patches. I didn't really have any tremendous heat issues with mine. Nothing like I've experienced with this one. And there was a patch that came out a couple of days ago. It's supposed to fix a few things. So I've got build number 64.0.A.5.71, over 300 megabytes. And I had hoped that it would do something to fix some of the thermal issues. Maybe it did a little bit. But I tested it out the next day. I went out, same thing, almost the exact same spot, 2 minutes, 40 seconds, recording at 4K, overheats, using the camera outside, overheats. Now, what I have experienced is it does warm up some when you're just using it. If you use it with the screen on for a long time, especially with 120 hertz, it seems to not be as bad when you have it on 60 hertz. I mean, there are things you can do to work around this. Just like with the Z Flip 3, I've made videos about how to get better battery life. If you need better battery life, if you need good battery life, the Z Flip 3 isn't necessarily the phone for you. So no phone is without its issues. No phone is without its limitations. No phone is perfect. And I'm not here to try and say, okay, you should go get a Samsung, you should go get an iPhone, whatever. You're here because you like this phone. I'm here because I like this phone. I am a true fan of this phone, and I love it. I don't even have the red lights on right now. This is not a rant. This is just Adam J. Matlock, Tech Odyssey, talking to you guys, letting you know it's okay to like the phone. It's okay to pay the money for the phone. It's okay to appreciate it and enjoy it. But we can't make excuses whenever companies knowingly sell us a product that has problems. Can they fix it? Probably. I'm sure what they're going to do is they're going to change some stuff around, probably some more optimization, maybe some more tweaks to the app, probably some throttling on the primary core when it doesn't need it when you're doing video stuff. There's probably workarounds for it. They don't exist right now. I hope Sony's working on them, but that's another frustrating thing. This everybody's just guessing out in the wind because there's no change log for the most recent update. Now, it does seem kind of apparent that there are some things that have been cleared up with the telephoto camera. It's less blurry. Some people are saying that some of the heat stuff is better. I was able to get through an hour-long live stream with the selfie camera. The selfie camera, I don't think, seems to be having the same issues as the primary camera. So maybe that's also a thing that's not as big of a limiting factor when it comes to this phone. But the moral of the story is, it's okay to like the phone. It's okay to support the brand. But it's not okay to make excuses when clearly it has a problem. And again, I've done this with multiple phones. It's kind of frustrating. Like, if we don't complain about it, if we don't be critical about it, if we don't say things about it, then it's not going to get fixed, and Sony's just going to keep taking your money. And then when the Xperia 1 Mark V comes out, the first thing I'm going to have people asking me is, does it have heat issues? Because you already know it's probably going to happen again. So that's the thing. That's the spiel here. You can be a fanboy. You can be a fangirl. You can be a supporter. You can care about the phone and the brand and support them, but don't give people a pass and make it seem like, oh, this is all right. It's like that meme with the little dog with the coffee cup in the burning room saying, this is all right. This is okay. It's not okay. Are there ways you could work around it? Mostly. Is it something that is tolerable? Is it something that impacts the day-to-day usage? I can get through the day and not have a heat warning. But I'm also not somebody who goes out and takes a lot of pictures and videos. Or if I do, it might not necessarily be outside in the heat of the day. So there are trade-offs. There are ways you can kind of mitigate it a little bit. But if you wanted to use this straight up to go out and record video and pictures outside, I think you're going to be at a loss. And I've seen some people say, okay, hey, it's working fine for me. Again, maybe that comes back to a quality assurance thing. Maybe it comes back to quality control. Maybe there's some bad batches. I don't know. That's why I'm trying another one. But don't make excuses. You don't have to bash them. You don't have to throw them under the bus. But don't settle. Don't settle for this stuff and accept it just because Sony spoon feeds it to us and says, here, this is what you get. And then it has problems, okay? That's what I wanted to get the message out there. And hopefully this stuff will start kind of rising up to the top, just like it did with Google. There were a lot of people complaining about the Pixel 6 and saying, look, I'm losing signal. I'm losing Bluetooth. And it took them a couple of weeks to finally admit that there was a problem. And then they tried to fix it and they made it worse. And then they tried to fix it again. So sometimes it's a moving target. But if we're not vocal about things, and if we don't bring these things up and we don't talk about them, we don't put it out there in community, and we don't air our grievances when it comes to having serious issues with especially an expensive phone. Nothing will ever change, and the status quo will stay the same. And we'll be saying this again when it comes around the Xperia 1 Mark 5 and Mark 6 and everything else. So enjoy your phone. I hope you do. I enjoy it. I don't want to get rid of it. I really don't. And I very much enjoy this because there's a lot of phones out there right now, and not a lot of them I think are as compelling or as exciting as this phone. It's been a really, really nice breath of fresh air, other than when I try to get fresh air and record, right? So anyway, I'm going to wrap this one up. I know this is a long video. There's a lot I wanted to talk about here, but I think maybe this is something that might resound with a lot of you who are watching this saying, yeah, I love the phone. This is problematic, and it hurts our feelings. It's something that we get frustrated about because we want it to be as good as it should be. We want it to live up to its potential, and straight out of the gate, the first couple of months of its existence just hasn't quite been right there. It's been just slightly off target because of the heat issues, and I hope that they get it fixed very soon for all of us so everybody can be happy and everybody can love their phone and not have these problems anymore. So that's all I got. If you have any questions, you have any comments, you have any discussion you want to do about this, if you have your own thoughts and feelings on it, please throw them out there. We'll talk about it. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like and the subscribe button and the little notification bell if you want updates when new videos come out. And as always, thanks for being here. I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you guys next time.